I'm Amy Koppelman. I'm the founder of Pathlitics. Pathlitics is a platform to help neurodivergent high school students and their families figure out their next step after high school. I built Pathlitics from direct experience. As a parent of a neurodivergent child, I learned that there are a ton of additional factors to consider for plans after high school. Yet, I found it was really difficult to find this information, such as how each college supports students with disabilities or even the many specialty programs that are available. And it's even harder to find other students to talk to and learn about their experience to see what's right for them. Pathletics' goal is to make this information available to everyone. We have an extensive post-secondary database of all different types of options, as well as firsthand testimonials directly from recent grads. These testimonials bring all aspects of their experiences to life, such as the social life, extracurricular, housing, and it exposes the supports and accommodations received to help normalize the experience and promote self-advocacy. There's also the opportunity to connect with college students and alumni to get your specific questions answered about their college, work, gap year, or other experience, and to help students find the right fit. We are thrilled to host this webinar with our fabulous panel of experts. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Marcus Sutra. Marcus leads For the Good Consulting and was the co-founder and president of Eye to Eye, a near-peer mentorship program for neurodivergent students. Marcus channeled his experience growing up with a learning disability and ADHD to make a positive impact on other students' lives. Marcus, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate being here tonight. And Pathletics is an amazing tool, and I'm so excited to have so many more people joining us tonight to learn about that and learn about the process of transitioning from high school to college or beyond. And so thank you all for being here tonight. People often ask me, like, what's the thing that I can do for my young person? What's the thing I can do for my child? And what's the thing I can do for my student? And showing up to events like this and learning and asking questions and engaging in community is the most important thing you can do. So thank you for being here. As Amy said, I was the co-founder of Eye to Eye, and one of the core elements of Eye to Eye was helping students successfully transition to college, which is why I'm so supportive and so excited about this work that we're doing at Pathletics. And yeah, now I work at For the Good Consulting, working with philanthropists and nonprofits all around supporting them scale their efforts and really focused on organizations that want to support young people. So first, we're going to have our panelists introduce each other and share a little bit about themselves with you all. Then we'll go in through some questions. We received a ton of questions from our audience ahead of time, which was really great. So thank you. But we're going to want more questions coming in. Also, everyone's experience here is really, really important. And tonight is about building this community and building knowledge. So if you have ideas, if you have comments, if you have a story to share, please throw it in the chat. I love an active chat. Makes these types of events much more fun. If you're firing off emojis on things you hear that you like, if you're adding comments in, if you're encouraging other people, if you're firing off questions, we love that. So thank you so much. And we'll hopefully, if we don't get to your question throughout the list tonight that was sent in ahead of time, we will try to get to it towards the end of the panel discussion. All right, so I'm going to go Adrian, Michelle, Ava, because that's how you guys are organized on my screen. If you guys can just quickly introduce yourselves, your role, your name, where you're coming from tonight, and why this conversation is so important to you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. My name is Adrienne Frumberg, and I'm an independent college consultant. Despite my background, I'm actually based in New Milford, Connecticut, about 75 minutes or so from New York City. I work with students from not only the tri-state area, but all over the country and abroad, helping to find the right college fit. And my specialties are working with students who have learning differences, neurodivergence, health conditions, mental health issues, or anything that, kind of makes their college process a bit different than the traditional path. So I'm helping the students and the families come up with their college list and which colleges are the best fit for them. And this conversation is very important to me because there are a lot of different considerations for students who are approaching the college process in terms of thinking about what supports are offered on campus. So that's why I'm here tonight to share what my experiences have been and answer any questions that the students and families might have.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Metch. I'm here as a parent of neurodivergent young adults, I'll say. I was going to say children, but they're young adults. I have a 21-year-old who is neurodivergent, an 18-year-old who's neurodivergent, and then a 15-year-old who's neurotypical. We're not up to him yet, and we are still very much in the thick of all of the college and transition planning. My 21-year-old started college, and then we needed to shift gears a little bit and figure out a different path for him. And my 18-year-old is a senior in high school. And so we are, we just finished the college application process, and now we are determining like gap year or going straight to school, what supports he'll need when he gets to school. So I'm here as someone who's been through this process, but is still in the process. So I don't necessarily think of myself as an expert, but I do have, I've talked to lots of people and have my own experiences that hopefully will be helpful to you as you go through this.
Hi, I'm Ava, and I'm also here just to share my experience as a college student with dyslexia. And this conversation is important to me because lots of my closest friends are neurodivergent or have learning differences as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories and your insight. So the first question that we got, a lot of the questions that we got from everyone were around planning and preparation. So I thought it'd be a good place to start there, especially because I know we have a lot of parents of students who are juniors and seniors and sophomores in high school. So we'll start with Adrian. When is the time to start planning for this transition? And what should that kind of planning involve? And then Michelle, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, and thanks, Marcus, for the question. And the short answer is it's really never too early to get started, and the more time you have, the better. I start working with students as early as 9th grade, but I would say the majority of the students and families I start working with are during their 10th or 11th grade year. So as far as the timeline goes, during 10th and or 11th grade, having students start to visit colleges is definitely a great idea. Actually, being on the campus is vastly different than looking at the college online. That said, like Pathlitics, for example, it does really provide the details of what is offered on the campuses, as well as looking at the college website to see what exactly is offered. By law, every college does have to have that Office of Disability Services or Office of Accessibility. But beyond that, many of the students and the families that I'm working with are looking for additional support. So are there professional learning specialists there, and how many times a week can they see those professionals? Is there a traditional writing center, or is there more than that? And how many touch points can the student have every week? Again, that, the college has to have that sort of office by law is very different than, a fee-for-service program where the student is able to go into a center, a certain number of times a week. So if the student and the family are going on campus, they can actually schedule not only a traditional campus tour and an info session, but actually meet with the Office of Accessibility and or the program. So those conversations are really important. And I love when students come back and say, like, I had a vibe check and it was really welcoming and warm. Or from the other side of the coin, sometimes they come back and they say, wow, I asked for an accessible tour. If some of my clients have health conditions or physical disabilities, and they didn't feel welcomed. So those in-person visits are really important and critical in the process.
Awesome.
So I think it's never too early, as Adrian said, and at the same time, you're here, so the time is now. Whenever you realize it's time. And part of the process of this journey is that as you learn more, as a parent, I know for me, there were always regrets that I had of things I didn't deal with sooner or think about sooner. But the reality is that we can only make the best decisions we have with the information we have at that time. So I would say you're starting now, or maybe you've already started, and that's okay. You have to let go of anything you didn't do because you didn't know previously. And I would also say that it can be super hard to predict where your student is going to be in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years. So even while you're starting thinking about this transition, also know that there's there is more that you will uncover as your child grows and matures and learns and has interventions, and other supports. And that we're thinking about the social, emotional, academic, executive functioning. There's all of these different areas that might impact your child. So what you think they might need as a 10th grader academically in college may or may not, in all of those kind of domains, things are in flux and might develop at different rates over the course of their time in high school and in college and beyond. So you're really going for a moving target, which can be challenging. And so you just have to go one step at a time.
Awesome. Awesome. We had a couple questions around creating the college list, how many to apply to, and should you be on campus and visit every single one of these schools? Adrian, based on your comment, I feel like the last part you're going to say yes to, but I'm just kind of curious if you could elaborate on those pieces on like how many schools does it make sense to be applying to? I think a lot of parents are thinking about, we're going into the summer, we're kind of kicking this process off. Maybe we're going into our junior year next year. So just advice in that early part of the process.
That's a great question. I think that since 2020, there has definitely been a trend of families and students applying to more schools. I think because many of the colleges became test optional at that time, some of them are backpedaling and making changes on that. But I think parents and students were unsure and said, like, let's cast a wide net and apply to 18 colleges, which in my opinion is far too many. The Common Application, which accepts applications to almost 1,000 colleges in the United States, permits students to apply to 20 colleges. That is the maximum allowed. That said, I believe that is far too many. And along with those applications come short essays, lots of other things to think about, and executive functioning skills, like remembering to send in different pieces to all of these schools. So in my opinion, I think if you have a nice balanced list of 3 reach schools, 3 target schools, and 3 sort of safe, likely schools, a 9 is a nice number. That being said, like, I do think students are mostly around 12 in my experience. I think that's been my sort of common number. And in terms of visiting all those schools, for most families, it is not realistic to visit all of those schools. When you send in your applications, you're generally finding out sometimes on a rolling basis, but all colleges will let you know by the end of March, April 1st at the latest. And that month of April offers time for accepted student events, for students to meet actual students on campus, to go to student panels, to actually feel what it's like to be a student. Sometimes they'll even stay overnight and offer overnights. So students can narrow that list, hopefully, and visit the schools of top interest. I recognize that like flying all over the country is not really viable for most families.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Yeah. And I know for myself, to your earlier comments, as someone who's neurodivergent and went to college, my biggest regret from my college search was not going to the disability office and having those meetings, having those conversations. I got lucky. I won the disability office lottery and had a great community there at Keene State where I went to school, but that was not on my tour. I was much more concerned with like the bookstore and the baseball field and the gym and all these other.
Right, right.
Ava, I wanted to share, if you could share a little bit about your process. I know you're soon to be thriving in college right now, and so like you clearly made the right choice. And so, what kind of went into your selection process, and what was that like for you?
Right. So I am very happy at UT, but I definitely had to figure out exactly what I was looking for. And I kind of figured that out as I went. Like I realized that I wanted to be close to home, which I'm from Dallas, so Austin is only 4 hours away, which is far enough where I get to have my independence, get to explore a totally new city, but I'm also right by home if I ever need to visit or have my parents visit me. And I was also just very excited about like going to a big school because I was excited about the opportunities. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to study, so I figured it's a big school. They probably will have options for whatever I end up on. And I just really liked the idea of like going to a school that has like big sports and just like such a big, wide, well-known community.
Awesome. Did you get a chance to meet with the disability office before you went? Was that something that was on your tour? Were you smarter than I was in making this decision?
I wish, yeah, I was kind of like you. I was very excited about the school itself, like the football, all that stuff. And I just kind of assumed they would have a really helpful disability service office. And they have a great one. But one thing I learned the hard way is that at a school with 40,000 other students, when you're applying for those accommodations, there's probably going to be lots of other people applying at the same time. So for me, I did it right at the start of the school year, which I thought was early, but it ended up taking me a little bit into the semester until I could actually receive those accommodations because there were so many people that were before me. So I would definitely, if I could do it again, I would, as soon as I knew I was going to UT, I would start that process, get my letter in, get my accommodations approved as soon as possible.
Awesome. Michelle, how does this track with you? You've obviously been on a few college tours, having multiple kids, and so I'm just curious what that experience
Yeah,
was like.
I think for both of my children, it was a very different experience, and I think that it really, as much as it should be student led, that's great. You might have a student that is really excited about the process, like Ava was saying about football and the schools and seeing what was out there. And other students that might be more nervous, anxious, hesitant about the process. And so you really have to follow their lead. My oldest, he applied to 4 schools, and my middle, he applied to 14. And I say we because it definitely was a team effort, for better and worse. And that's something, I think we're going to touch on later in terms of like the role of the parents in all of that. But it definitely, for both of them, was a team effort in terms of identifying schools and certainly coordinating visits and that kind of stuff.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so I think one of the questions I've spoken literally all over the world around this topic, and one of the questions that I get the most is, should I disclose that I'm neurodivergent? Should I disclose when I go to college? Should I disclose when I'm in the workplace? And I know that we have some students who, wear their neurodiversity on their sleeve and wear it as a badge of pride and write about it in their college essay, and others who maybe aren't sure how to talk about this or navigate the college experience around disclosure. So Adrian, maybe we could start with you just a little around like the documentation process and the process of disclosing and when should have give me and Ava some advice. When should we have disclosed to our learning difference in the process?
I think there's a common misconception that, like, say you go to a tour and you go to a meeting with the Office of Disability Services. I think students are very fearful of, if they disclose their disability in a meeting at the disabilities office during the application process, that they're then going to call the admissions office and tell them about the student's disability. Those are 2 very completely different offices. They are not going to be communicating about a student's disability. If you go in and you ask questions during your application process, the disability office will not be telling admissions about your diagnosis. I do have students who feel very strongly about writing their college essay about, say they have a dyslexia diagnosis or they're on the autism spectrum and they want to talk about the challenges and then the strengths that they've developed as a result. I think that the answer is that it depends. Some students want to do that, others do not. So you're certainly not required in the application process. There is no question on the common application do you have a disability and what is it? Once you're admitted to the college, you have until May 1st, which is National Decision Day, to put down your deposit at one institution. At that point, once you're deposited, you can then, as Ava mentioned, you can begin the process of requesting accommodations. During that time, students will fill out typically a form online and then upload the documentation that they have with their disability listed. That could be through a neuropsych report, it could be an educational evaluation, a letter from a doctor. Some students who have mental health concerns may have a letter from a psychiatrist. Those are acceptable forms of documentation. Most colleges will not allow an IEP on its own, but some, it really does depend on the college. They're very clear on their websites about what the acceptable documentation is. So I hope that, I know I kind of jumped around, but I hope that it's clear that you are not required to disclose your disability at the time of applying.
Very helpful. Ava, maybe you can share with us a little bit about your process for, disclosing at the University of Austin, and then maybe a little bit about, like, I know even when you are, registered with the disability office and are able to get accommodations in your IEP and things like that transfer, there's still a lot of self-advocacy required. And you shared with me a really powerful story when we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, about how you had to first advocate for yourself. So I think maybe that's a two-part question. So, like, how was it like to make that transition, and then how did you advocate for yourself that first time?
Right. So I think something that I was really lucky for is my high school specialized in teaching kids with neurodiversity. So it was just so normal for me to talk about it and not be ashamed. And I was proud of it. So I did end up actually writing my college essay on my dyslexia and how I feel like it gives me a different point of view, like a different work ethic. So I was lucky that I feel like it's just a part of my identity that I've always been comfortable talking about. And I've also been lucky to be surrounded by people who understand and relate. But when I was going to college, it was a little different because now, I'm not in the majority for having a learning difference. And so I filed for my accommodations, but at my school specifically, to receive any accommodations, even after they're approved, we will have to go individually meet with each professor. And this was scary, even though I do feel very confident in like talking about my dyslexia. I I haven't met these professors, so it definitely was nerve-wracking at first, but I mean, I did it. I wanted my accommodations, so I'd go and meet with them, and I would tell them how I think the accommodations would look like in their class for me to succeed. And in the end, I was very grateful that I have that push to do it because it gives me a really like a good opportunity to form a relationship with my professors, and then I can also they can hear it from me instead of just looking at a paper, and I can really explain how I need to be accommodated.
Awesome. Wonderful. Michelle, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to add that it really is, from my experience, a very personal decision about whether to close on the application. My oldest did write his essay about being autistic and why he chose information technology, related to his autism as his area of interest. But my middle son did not disclose his disability, except he did in the other, there's a section in the Common App for like other factors. And he only did 1 year of foreign language in high school, which is our graduation requirement. But some of the colleges that he was applying to had a minimum of a 2 year foreign language requirement. And so we called the admissions office and said he only took 1 year of foreign language because of his language-based learning disabilities. Is that going to preclude him from admission? And they said no. And we put that in that other factors section where he said New York State requires 1 year of foreign language for graduation. I was able to take that, but I have a language-based learning disability, so didn't take additional years. And he got into to 13 out of 14 schools he applied to, like even his reaches. So it didn't hurt him. I don't know what the process is on the admission side, but that's important to note that if you have something impacted by your disability, you can disclose it in that section to help explain your application, help give the fuller picture
Yeah.
of you as
Right.
an applicant.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. So when you first had to go and advocate to your professors, did you ever receive any kind of like pushback on that, or what was that like when you actually had to disclose, and how did they respond to the accommodations that you need? And if you could share maybe some of the accommodations that you currently utilize in school, and then Adrian, maybe you can talk more broadly about all the different types of accommodations that a student can access.
Yeah, so when I would go and talk to my professors, they were really friendly about it. Some of them would just kind of agree, and then that would be that. But a lot of them actually were willing to go above and beyond, and they were asking me how they can better accommodate for me in like on top of those accommodations, which was really great. And I also found that my accommodations really vary for each class that I'm in. Some of the ones that I use mostly are extra time on test taking, which is very important to me. And then for math, I can use like a calculator. For writing assignments, I'm able to use a computer and spell check. But that extra time was really like what I needed. And then also a big one is audiobooks, because in college there's so much reading, and audiobooks have made such a difference for me. But that one is more tricky for me to come by. Um, but usually my professors have been very helpful with that.
Yeah, Adrian, can you share with us a little bit more about kind of other types of accommodations that students access?
Definitely. I've had students request many different accommodations. As Ava mentioned, obviously extra time on tests is very popular. Some of my clients have different issues that necessitate flexible deadlines for assignments. That can be a more difficult one to receive an approval for, but not impossible. And if they are, initially rejected, students can also appeal their accommodations. In addition, I find that a lot of students, now that there are so many wonderful programs out there, software programs, in terms of having an actual note taker sit in the classroom, that is very unlikely. Now colleges are providing software subscriptions to things like Glean, where they can have the class actually like transcribed, so they can then later read it and review what they have. So that can be incredibly helpful. In addition, I've had students request accommodations for things like housing. Some of my students who have ADHD say that they really struggle to focus and to study in their dorm rooms with other distractions. So I have had some students be approved for a single room. That also can sometimes come up for students with mental health issues and a wide array of other diagnoses. So housing is definitely something to consider, and housing accommodations for single rooms are more difficult also, and because there are just a limited number of single rooms. So moving along with those accommodations, if say someone knows where they want to go, even in March, and they put their deposit down, they can begin the accommodations process earlier. And I say that like do that one as soon as you can. But I do think, yeah, those would probably be the primary ones. Maybe, sitting in the front of the class, testing in a separate location. Michelle, maybe I'm missing some others, but those are.
That's most of them. I mean, my older son also had exemption from the foreign language requirement.
Okay.
I think it's super important to work with whoever, whether you're going from an educational evaluation that was done through school for an IEP, whatever that last triennial you have, before you graduate high school, or through a private neuropsych evaluator. To have someone who really is going to look at where your vulnerabilities are as a student and what would be helpful to you. And the advice that I got, which I think was really good advice, which was for them to recommend every accommodation that could possibly help you. It's better to have all the accommodations. You might not use them all, depending on the class. Like you were saying, Ava, different subjects, different types of courses, the way materials presented, might be better or harder for you, depending on the situation. But if the disability office has approved a list of accommodations for you, then you have the flexibility to take advantage of them as you need them. And it's always better to do that rather than mid-semester, midterms come and you realize, oh, I really needed that time and a half, but I didn't have it. It's much harder to do that once you've already gotten behind.
Yeah, awesome. Adrian, you want to jump in there as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can't tell you how many times with my students who go to college, I always text them in September, like Michelle said, in midterm time, how many times I've said, make sure to use your accommodations, to apply for all of the accommodations. Students don't always listen, and then they're at the point in the mid-semester where they're like, well, I'm getting a D. Should I drop this class? Not a great point to be at, in which case their parents are also upset because they're then not going to get the money back if they do drop the class at that point. So just to echo what Michelle said, it is absolutely critical to apply for as many accommodations as possible so they are in your back pocket should you want to use them. Do not delay, do not wait till the midpoint of the semester.
Yeah,
Well, I
that's
would
such
say
a
that's also true, not just about accommodations, but about any special support programs, like full comprehensive programs that universities have. There's a wide variety of types of programs that universities are offering now. So I would say once you apply, once you pick the college, some people, part of our process was looking at colleges specifically that had autism support programs, but you should look into it. And even if you're not sure if you want to go into that program, you can still apply and go through that process. And usually the university through that process will determine if it's a right match for you. And you can also determine, does it make sense from you? Just from reading the description on the website, you might not have an idea if it's the right fit for you. But I think it's always better to err on the side of putting more supports and more accommodations in place, and then you can peel them away if you don't need them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think that like, you know, that as somebody who myself who had to advocate for myself and really establishing that relationship with the disability office early on is so important. Like that individual really became my advisor in college, and I've seen so many students. The drop off statistically, I think it's 90% of students utilize accommodations in K-12, and only about 17% utilize them in post-secondary. And some of that's because students no longer need them, or the environment has shifted in such a way. But a lot of that is due to students not being able to advocate for themselves or not feeling comfortable in that new space. And so, Adrian, to your point, like mid-semester is hard to now kind of then start establishing a relationship or try to get paperwork in when a student is doing poorly. So I know that there's also a lot, Ava, you and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about accommodations like the ones we've discussed, you know, audiobooks and extended time and all these types of things. We also talked a lot about some of the things that you that aren't on the list that help you in college. And I thought that was a really fascinating piece of advice. And I know, like for myself, someone with ADHD, I no longer had to sit still for 7, 8 hours a day, like in high school, right? When I went to college and went into the work world, those are very different environments. So extended time wasn't as helpful, wasn't as necessary for me. You know, there was just different accommodations applied differently. And but you were talking about some stuff outside of the classroom that's benefited you. What are some of those things?
Yeah, so it was a big transition for me because in high school I would have like a 8-hour school day, and then I would go after school and do sports or other extracurriculars, and then I would just like do my homework, maybe see friends, but it was my time was always very full and blocked out. And going to college, I realized that I really like having my time full and blocked out. And in college, it's very different. You have so much free time, which is very exciting. But for me, I had to figure out how to spend that free time because some days I would only have one class and I would get all my homework done. And then I'd think, okay, well, what now? But it ended up being so much fun because I was able to find like new hobbies. And one thing I found on campus was there were yoga classes open every week that I started going to those, and I would find new fun places to study that motivated me. And I learned how to take the bus downtown, and I could go like explore without having a car. And that really was helpful for me because then once I kind of figured out what my day could look like at college, I was able to kind of get back to a schedule and, fill my time and not just, scroll on my phone for hours after my one class finished.
Yeah, busy can be is a very good thing. I think I think a lot of us agree with that, that being busy and having your day full is awesome. And the last thing I'll say about accommodations is that the way the technology has transformed. Adrian, when you said the comment about not having note takers, I had a whole relationship with a note taker. This was 20 years ago, but like it was like a person that I got to know, and like we would work together on note taking and all that kind of stuff. And now having things like AI built in or audiobooks, I literally had books on tape, and now that you can get through whether it's Learning Ally or audible.com or whatever it is, you can get pretty much every single piece of audio, and your laptop reads to you and all of these different types of things. So it's amazing how more ubiquitous the technology is for students. Michelle, one of the questions that came in was around what do you wish counselors and educators had kind of done to prepare you for this transition, and wanted to throw that question to you as a parent, like that, hindsight is 2020 kind of.
Yeah, I think it's, well, super challenging because both of my students, were hit with COVID, right? When school interruptions, right? Which I think really impacted our journey through high school and into college significantly. So I'm sure people who are applying now had that in middle school, right? We all had that disruption. I think one for my oldest, who really had, I think, more challenges as he got older than we or other people were expecting. And because he was very intelligent, the assumption was made like, oh, he's just going to go to a 4-year college. And I think the counselors, educators didn't really, no one was prepared. No one really understood the impact his disability was going to have on him and how that would impact college for him. So I think we were really caught off guard, I think, with those struggles. And so in hindsight, it helped me a lot, obviously, with my second son, because we felt much more prepared in terms of understanding where we would have to be by the end of high school to move on to the next phase. I think it would have been helpful starting in 9th grade to know about the other options that were out there. That while a 4-year school works for many students, it doesn't work for all students.
Yeah.
And to know what kind of transition programs are there. Other independent, like living, experiential, college-like programs, or living at home and starting, which is what he ended up doing, living at home and starting part-time as a commuter, wasn't even on my radar when he was in 9th, 10th, 11th grade. It really wasn't until senior year that we thought, oh, he doesn't have to just go away and do college, right? There might be a way to start this at a slower pace. It's hard to know what you don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would say, like I said at the beginning, to know, first of all, to learn as much as you can as a parent. There are this resource, Pathlitics, online, right? We have access to so much information. Also to try to build community in real time, in real life, with other parents of students with disabilities, special education teacher, just try to build your community, to learn from other people, and also to know that it might not be a straight line, whatever it is. Like if somebody had told me that 6 years ago, I think it would have been a little bit easier, right? To know, like, be prepared for different outcomes and having to shift gears and change paths. And that's okay. I think as a parent, it can be hard, if you're on social media and you see friends posting like all exciting things and you might be on a different path, it feels very lonely. But certainly post-COVID, there are so many students with learning disabilities, mental health challenges that are not taking the straight line path. It's just that people aren't necessarily sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. Adrian, can you speak a little bit more about the different paths that
Yeah,
students take? And
I
we're talking a lot about college tonight, but there's a lot of options after high school, you
Yeah,
know?
I love hearing, what Michelle said, that there are many different paths to success. I think that that has become a more accepted notion since 2020. I work with students who are not necessarily all bound for four-year college. I think that there have been many different paths that have become more common now, which could be going to a transition program. It could be instead of going to college right away, possibly doing a gap year program that is structured with different things, such as an internship. It could involve working on executive functioning skills, life skills, social skills. I think that many people don't really realize what a deferral is. So if you get accepted to college, say, you do think you want to go at one point and get your degree, you can actually request a deferral after you put down your deposit on May 1st. You can ask the college for 1 year and enter the following fall. So I have every year certain students who are pursuing that path and doing many different things. There is a great website, the Gap Year Association website. I can pull that link and add it to the chat. But I do have students who are pursuing those types of programs, as well as, if you decide, like Michelle said, maybe four-year college isn't the path. Some students want to try out college before committing and trying those classes out as a non-matriculated student. That means that you are just taking a class or two at a university. The only prerequisite is to graduate high school. And you can register at a local college. You can live at home, try it out and see, like, is college really for you? Having that idea of like, I want to elect to continue my education. That's really an important thing to consider. I think a lot of students feel the pressure, like Michelle said, from social media, being on that hamster wheel. Everyone's talking about it, but really it is a lot of work. Ava can articulate that it is a lot of work to go to college. So and it's okay if you're not sure. And there are many other paths. You can also, instead of enrolling in, I should have mentioned this before, like instead of enrolling in 4 or 5 classes, it is possible to request the accommodation to have an abbreviated course load and take 2 or 3 classes. Traditionally at college, to be living in housing, you do have to be a full-time student, but I have seen a number of my students request that lower course load, and that be a really important accommodation to them to be able to be successful. They can't do 4 or 5 classes. It's just too much, and they have taken a lower course load. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah, no, and I've heard of students who've flourished in taking a gap year and just had that year to like mature and grow and work and have other types of experiences, and then going into college. And I think a lot of us who look back on college were like, was I really ready for what college entails at 18? I think a lot of us would be like, I'd like to go back now. I think I'm ready now to go to college, to be honest, and to really engage with all the learning and the experiences that you get to have as a student there. Ava, have you said you started off talking about how you have a lot of friends who are members of the neurodivergent community. Do you know any of them that have gone through kind of non-traditional paths, or most of them go right out of college? What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I did actually have a lot of friends that would take a gap year and they would stay home and do some local classes. And I know it was hard for them. Some seniors will do these traditions where you like wear your college merch and it's kind of all about like the college you're going to. And I know that that was a difficult point just because the culture, but and then in hindsight, like lots of us that just like went straight into college ended up wishing we kind of took more of a break just because like you said it's as prepared as I felt, like there was just a lot of learning that happened as I went. So lots of friends did take those like ulterior routes and ended up being really successful and finding a great fit through that, just kind of everyone, I guess, finds it at a different time.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think statistically, Adrian, you probably correct me if I'm wrong here. I think it's 6 years is the average, I think,
Yeah.
or 5.5. Yeah, it's for students to finish, and I think people assume, I don't know, because of TV and movies or whatever, that it's 4 years and you're done. And that's just not necessarily the case. And I know students who were, not part of the neurodivergent community who did a year or two at community college and then transitioned and found that to be the best path for.
I think it's also a common misconception. People don't realize that community college credits can transfer to a four-year institution. Those credits count. I think that students think like, oh, they're not going to be valuable to me and they won't, if I want to go and get a bachelor's degree down the line, they don't think those will count. In addition, I have seen some of my students show more interest in vocational and trade schools as well. So those are really great professions to consider. So I think that that's a topic that a lot of people don't talk about that should be discussed more.
Yeah, no, definitely, completely agree. Now, there are different types of supports at different types of schools. There's a real spectrum that can be involved. You have some students who are doing the disability office and are receiving accommodations. Maybe they're just getting extended time. Some are getting much greater than that. And then there are some universities that have specialized programs. And this is something that they've prioritized as an asset for the school in a way that really attracts a lot of people to come into their university. I don't think UT Austin has a program like that, Ava, if I'm not mistaken, or do they?
I think they're actually working on one. I took a class about autism and neurodiversity, and we were kind of interacting with like the specific organizations on campus, and I think they're up and coming. So fingers crossed that they're there in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was just in Denver at Denver University speaking, and they have a learner effectiveness program, LEP program there, which is pretty notable. But Adrian, do you know of other? And maybe you can share a little bit about what those programs are like for families.
And I think some of them, the deadlines differ. Some of them will be during the application process. So college applications are due for early action around November, for regular decision around early January. So some of those college programs, the fee-for-service programs, the comprehensive ones that we've discussed, those will ask students to submit an application at the same time as they're submitting an application to the college. Others, you must be admitted to the college first, and then you can turn in an application to the support program. So that's definitely a distinction and something to look at. Sometimes they'll ask students to write short essays about, the supports they've received in high school and what's been effective for them and why they're seeking admission to the comprehensive support program. So those, do tend to be a little bit more involved and involve the student taking a moment to think about and gain some insight on like what actually has been helpful to me in high school and what do I need to be successful in college. Michelle, maybe you can, talk about that because I know
My
you
oldest son went to Pace University in New York, and he was part of their OASIS program, which is their program for neurodivergent students. It was a comprehensive fee-for-service program, which meant it was a flat fee per semester to be in the program that entitled you to 4 hours a week of executive function kind of coaching support. Plus, they had a social worker involved in the program, and you could meet with her weekly. And then there was someone that helped with coordinating some social plans and extracurriculars and kind of helped with navigating that piece of college life. Those programs are usually pricey. That being said, with the PACE program, with the amount of hours a week that you were allotted, it came out to similar if you were paying privately, for that amount of support. What was super helpful about that, yes, there are some colleges that offer varying levels of support, for some for no fee and for some sliding scale. There's a huge range of them. This one was one of the more comprehensive ones that we had found. What was really good about it, rather than using an outside executive function coach, was that the coaches that were university employees. And so in terms of direct contact with professors, they had that. They also had direct contact with the testing center and with things like that. We also found that because the PACE had the OASIS program, when the professor knew that my student was part of the OASIS program, I don't know what it would have been like had he not been part of that program, but like you were saying, Ava, some professors kind of went above and beyond. I think because he was affiliated with that program, it just gave professors a context of who he was and what he might need. And really, the professors were all so lovely and accommodating and really interested in having him be successful. And so I don't know how much being part of the program impacted that, if it would have been a similar experience otherwise. But having that communication between, if something was going on, and to talk to the professor, get clarification about an assignment. They encouraged him to do it, but because it was all internal, I think it was just a smoother process.
Sure, sure. All right, so we've got some questions coming in on the chat and coming to me directly, and so I wanted to address those. When I know it was suddenly only got 6 minutes left. I was worried we weren't going to go long enough, and of course we could go all night, I think. But one of the questions was around the disability service office not wanting to meet with a family until that they had been accepted and the deposit had been cleared, essentially, and so they were going to places like Reddit and Facebook to get advice on what it was like to be a neurodivergent student at school, or that school in general. And just the question, if anybody could tackle this, but like, where is there better places to be going? Obviously, Pathlitics is a good answer to this question, but are there other places where people can go to get information if the disability office says, hey, we don't have the chance to meet with you. We've got 5,000 students on our caseload or whatever it is, and we can't meet with you just yet until you're accepted.
I think it's challenging. I've heard some university disability offices will meet with you as prospective a student, and some won't. I don't know. I'm guessing it's about a shortage of staff, which I know has been, challenging kind of all over. Especially I know that there has been an increased number of students applying for accommodations and all of that. I do think sometimes that those social media, Reddit, Facebook, can sometimes be better, because you get, especially if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone, if you can get connected to people that have experience there, that is probably the most valuable. There is variability in experiences, so it's important to know that and get a few opinions if you can. But it's one thing what a disability office says they offer, especially when it comes to support. Accommodations is one thing, but to different support, tutor opportunities, or, other support opportunities, it's one thing for them to say it, and then sometimes what actually happens doesn't quite match what you thought it was. And that's where the first person accounts, I think, can be super helpful.
Super helpful, yeah.
I agree with that too. I think that those first person accounts you're going to hear from real people. Sometimes I've had students who have wanted to be connected with someone at the disabilities office, and I have seen at times the disabilities office have provided the student with an email address of like a current student, almost like a student ambassador of the disabilities office. That doesn't happen at all places, but I have seen that happen sometimes, just to hear like, what is it like to be someone who's registered here? Some of the colleges, I think there are only 18 of these around the country, but there are disability cultural centers on campus. That's another place. Like sometimes if those are on campus, students like to pop by those, or, sometimes there'll be like an organization on campus, like under the, I don't know, Ava, if you have one on your campus, but sometimes there are like clubs and organizations that are available for students with disabilities to get involved in, and those can be a really great place as well.
I would say also, I use social media for a lot of research too, but to take it with a grain of salt, because often people are very quick to complain on public spaces, right? And if they're having a good experience, they don't necessarily think to go and write about a good experience they had. So just keep that in mind, that you might be getting a view that's real, but it might not be the whole view.
Right. It's like Yelp. You're getting the 1-star and 5-star restaurant reviews. You're not hearing about the nuanced experiences that were kind of less memorable. Well, we're closing in. I want to get one more question from Adrian, and then I want to have Ava. I want you to have our closing remarks as our young person who's in the thick of it right now. So, Adrian, there's a bunch of questions that I'm going to try and compile into one around this summer, how to focus students on building a little bit of emotional resilience and advocacy skills, and what parents can do this summer around kind of honing those skills as they prepare to get ready to in this process.
I'm sure Michelle could also highlight some things, but I do like to review not only like a nuts and bolts checklist with juniors who are going to be applying to college, but there's also so many other things from like the independent living side, and that transition component of like what are the things that can be done now to help prepare the student for college, like giving them the opportunity to wake themselves up. Are they making any food for themselves? Do they know how to do their own laundry? Those self-advocacy skills, like, you know, not only in the way of like requesting accommodations, but like being a fully functioning adult are also equally as important. I know we talked about like sharing a story, but just one quick story. I had a parent who sent her child to the University of Vermont, and she put on like 8 fitted sheets on the top of the bed because she said like, well, he didn't want to learn how to do his laundry. So he would like remove a sheet like from the bed every week because he was so resistant to doing his own laundry. So that was a great example of what you should not do in terms of, those readiness skills, in terms of the life skill piece, like enabling your child to have those opportunities to be successful. So Michelle, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I think that that's a lot of it. I think what you're saying about the waking up, that hit me like a big light bulb years ago when I went to like my first seminar about this, and the person who was the head of a disability office said, if your child can't do XYZ, don't think just because miraculously they graduated high school and they step foot on a college campus that they'll be able to do all those things. If they don't do it before, it's not going to all of a sudden happen one day, right? So just start to think about some of that stuff ahead of time. And also, I think I have like a little bit of a different idea about the bed, like you pick your battles as a parent,
That's true.
right? And
Yep.
you work like if your child can successfully get to class and do their work, and you can afford it, you can get a laundry service, or change that, go up once a month and change the sheets, or what, like it, in terms of like knowing what medication you take, taking responsibility for that, not having to remind, or like that's what we're working on now in terms of setting up an app that's going to remind you to take your medicine, or like you were saying, Ava, like filling a schedule, right? This is what I'm going to study. This is when I'm going to eat lunch. During high school, there's less need for that because it's already set for you. But if you start to do things like that ahead of time, keep track on your phone or a paper calendar. Even if it's a school day, you go to school at 8 o'clock, to have your student put in their schedule and which days there's no school and when assignments are due, right? I think you can start doing little things like that, which end up being big things down the road when you're trying to do it all at once.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So I know we're at time, but I want to give Ava like the last 30 seconds. So Ava, if you can just give us like what advice, 30 seconds a minute, would you give to your younger self? So 15 years old, you're entering this process. What would you say to 15-year-old Ava?
Yes, I would definitely first tell her to take a breath because I thought finding the right fit for a college meant there was one option and like everything would align, like it would be perfect. And of course, like while there are lots of great options, there's always going to be pros and cons. So I wish I was just being more open-minded. Like I remember my mom would kind of tease me and say like if we visited a campus and it was overcast, I would say no. Or if I was hungry, I'd completely rule it out. So like just trying to be more open-minded and realizing like that there are multiple colleges that might be the right fit or multiple paths like there, and it can always change. But one thing I would have wanted to focus on is like just find the things that mean the most to me and kind of go from there. And there will be cons too, but focus on where the pros will be.
Awesome. Thank you, Ava. Well, I'll hand it back to Amy. And I just want to thank everybody so much for being a part of this conversation tonight, for throwing your ideas and experiences in the chat. Keep the conversation going, keep building community. And yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marcus. Thank you to our amazing panelists, Ava, Adrian, Michelle. You guys are awesome. Could go on and on listening to you guys. We are hoping to have more webinars. If you have ideas of what could be helpful to you, please feel free to email me, amy@pathlitics.com. If you're interested in access to Pathlitics or having your school access it, just reach out or go to our website. Thank you all. Have a good evening, and I hope this was helpful.